I loved Joe's work way before, many, many years before I met him, almost 20 years before I met him. In 1973, when his book called New Work came out, I sent him a fan letter. It's a wonderful book. I was very taken by it. I think it's a Black Sparrow Press book. Joe's work has this utter directness, unadorned, unaffected candor about it that I think is like George Herbert. It has that kind of purity of voice, utterly different in its world, but some of the same sense of a collected, pure spirit talking to you. And he knew how to get that down on the page. That's very rare, incredibly rare. And I responded very strongly to it. So I wrote him a fan letter. And when I got to know him much later, he brought it up and still had the letter. So it pleased me a lot. Well, I wanted to meet him. As I said, I first wrote him a letter in 73. I had read him before that. But I was, as I say, impelled to actually write in 73. And then years and years passed and we never met. Somehow, whenever he was in Cambridge or giving a reading, say at the Blacksmith House, I had to be out of town. And it just never happened. Finally, I believe it was in 91, there was a memorial reading for James Schuyler at MIT. And he was reading, and I was reading that night. And there was a gathering at Bill and Beverly Corbett's before. So I met Joe in their kitchen, very crowded room. Joe was utterly like the voice in his writing. Just this candid, pure, unaffected spirit. I adored him immediately. I fell for him like a ton of bricks. He could tell he just, completely threw me for a loop. And we, at the end of the evening, he gave me a little note with his phone number, and which I kept, still have. And and he said to write him. So we started exchanging letters. And then we got into this habit. I would take the shuttle to New York. Usually it's, say, the 2 o'clock shuttle. I get there about 3. Go to his apartment in Soho. We would go to galleries. After galleries, we would have dinner. And in Soho, there was a wonderful restaurant we both loved. I think it was called Berolini. It closed after he died. And I think it was Berolini. And then I would get on the last shuttle and come back to Cambridge. We were never lovers. I certainly would have been willing to venture there, but he said he had given up sex, and that was fine with me. I mean, I just adored being with him. That was our relationship until the last few months before he died. We talked as we got to know each other better. We talked every day on the phone. You know, one of the completely intolerable things about someone dying is that you can't talk to them anymore. That voice, that presence is completely inaccessible. All the king's men can't put him back together again. And that's really, it's completely intolerable, particularly, as I said, when we'd really talked every day for a couple of years, almost a couple of years. And the last few months after he told me he had AIDS, and he got very weak, and he really was not up to, we still talked almost every day. I sent him flowers every week. But he wouldn't let me see him the last few months. At that time, people who were dying of AIDS got very, very thin. And he just did not want me to see him. There were certainly people who were much older friends of his in New York that he saw and that sort of took care of him. But he would not let me come and see him. And he was a kind of saint. That sounds extreme, but I really don't. I've never known anybody that seemed so animated by such purity of spirit. He was very nice to people. He was very kind to people. He there was a kind of modesty and self-collected self-knowledge about him that was remarkable, and a kind of utter freshness in the way he perceived things in the world. Let me read a poem by Joe. This is a poem that is to James Schuyler, and it has the kind of modesty of self-presentation, a kind of self-irony that is very, very artful and beautifully made in this poem. It's called The Outer Banks. Could you turn this light on? This is a poem from Nothing to Write Home About. Very characteristic Joe title. I haven't read this in a long time. I used to sometimes at readings when I was at a reading where one read other people's work, I would read this, but it's been a long time, so probably not going to read it very well. But I feel immense affection for this. The Outer Banks. Those silly seagulls up in the sky over there remind me of a particular local postcard of many seagulls in the sky that could go on and on forever were it not for the edges. Reminds me of a particular Southampton postcard of a seagull soaring high, the only Southampton postcard simplistic enough to be commanding enough to survive the horrors of photochrome Technicolor. Reminds me of you, Jimmy, out in Southampton, in the big porterhouse, in your little room of many books. It takes game strategy to relocate now, as then. Until recovering the wildflowers on the wallpaper, peeling off the long, narrow corridor that leads up to your door. It is not closed. upon your window of green in from the yard of the sick tree in so many paintings by Fairfield Porter. That was the summer of? Not knowing how many years ago is just how it ought to be remembered, and is. Out trekking up South Main Street, you are a pair of thick white legs sporting Bermuda shorts of a most unusual length, and plain blue sneakers so you, they are. That was the summer of Campari and sodas. Remember? Out trekking up South Main Street in the pattern of the leaves from the shade of the trees that align South Main Street most daily is us. Trekking up South Main Street on our way to the drugstore with all the sunglasses on racks that whirl so fast, where you got your newspapers from, where I got my magazines from, where we both got our seagull postcards from, to send to each other mostly, when in the futures apart. And remember the store in the corner with all those plain, the kind of plain you pay for, English sweaters of every imaginable color that surely any respectable movie star would have a whole walk-in closet full of, that we bought a few from, too. Or if but two, baby blue I see for you, and raspberry sherbet for me. Easier to buy than to wear, especially when thrown over the shoulders like they did, with no socks on and Italian loafers. If money can buy such nice ankles, where? With sunglasses up in their hair. Ah, the good old days. If gobbled then, digested now, clarified by time, romanticized by mind. For today's repast, remembered. Out along these outer banks of North Carolina, for no reason whatsoever except ocean. Well, this is a very typical letter by Joe. First of all, he includes in it a postcard, which he loved to do. It's a postcard of Rudolph Valentino, and it's very, I think it's included because it's very explicit about his genitals, and Joe would have found that very funny. And then he says, "Dear Frank, I thank you again for the letter and cards. I especially like the hair-growing machine of 1936. I think this was a postcard. And last week, the girls dressed up as household appliances. Indeed, it must be strange for you, what with school starting and all. Do you miss being out of it a bit? Me, I still get butterflies around this time of year, as if just around the corner were yet another first day of school. Pat and Ron and Wayne, their son from Italy, to dinner last night. Did you know that he's Ron reading the night before you at the French Institute, Blaise Sendar's translations, which he has a new book of out, University of California. Hope Maiden Voyage isn't proving to be a disappointment, ? I did tell you, didn't I, ? That there is a really great short story by Denton Welch in the relatively new anthology of gay prose, edited by Ed White, published by Faber, I think. He introduced me to Denton Welch, which was a marvelous writer, and I had never read him. I'd never even heard of him. Shouldn't be hard to find. It will make you swoon. Me, I'm reading yet another gay anthology, Mae West is Dead, edited by Adam Max Jones, a young English writer I like a lot. Pretty hit or miss, like most anthologies. Labor Day weekend and a sunny day in the 70s is promised, though chilly and foggy so far, 7 a.m. And that's about it for news, if indeed there is any. Till again soon, love, Joe." As I was mentioning, he loved postcards, and see if I can find it now. there's a very, very funny postcard, which I think I included here. Yes, he sent me this postcard of a pissoir in Paris that is incredibly phallic, and he found very funny. Dear Frank, just want to get a word or two off to you this morning because it may be a few days before I get it together to write a real letter. More gray days and weather, and Nathan is here. Tonight, ham and fava beans, blueberries and cream. This afternoon, to the gym with Ron, and that's about it. Love, Joe. He loved giving this sort of running commentary on food and who he had seen, and he has a kind of a wonderful delight and a sense of the I wouldn't say the adequacy of these things, but of the plenitude, their genuine joys. Again, a postcard, and he says on the back, Dear Frank, glorious autumn days, reading Sense and Sensibility for the umpteenth time, and all is well. With you too, I hope. Love, Joe. Anyway, this is a postcard with Joan Collins against leopard skin, and he writes, Dear Frank, I may still be here and I may not. My father had a heart attack but is recovering fine so far. Will know more after exploratory work this week. We'll keep you posted. In the meantime, forgive me this awful postcard, awful underlined. Love, Joe. Joe has a wonderful little book called The Friendly Way, which is made up of quotations from a little local newspaper that prints little essays by people, comments by country people. And it's really quite wonderful. And let me read a poem by me that mentions it. In memory of Joe Brainard. The remnant of a vast oceanic bruise, wound delivered early and long ago, was in you purity and sweetness self-gathered, chosen. When I tried to find words for the moral sense that unifies and sweetens the country voices in your collage, The Friendly Way, you said, it's a code. You were a code I yearned to decipher. In the end, the plague that full swift runs by took you, broke you. In the end, could not take you, did not break you. You had somehow erased within you not only meanness, but anger, the desire to punish the universe for everything not achieved, not tasted, seen again, touched. The undecipherable code, unbroken. Even as the soul learns once again, the body, it loves and hates, is made of earth and will betray it. I gave Joe a coin that was an ancient Greek coin. And this is a poem that is built around the image of that coin. Again, this is by me. Poem is, the end of the poem makes more sense if you know that an angel is not just a fat, cute cherub, but is, in its serious meaning, an angel is an intermediary between the divine, or the ground of things, and human life. Someone who travels back and forth between those two worlds. A coin for Joe with the image of a horse, circa 350, 325 BC. Coin. Chip of the closed, lost world, toward whose unseen grasses this long-necked emissary horse eagerly still stretches to graze. World, grass, stretching horse, ripe with hunger, bright circle of appetite, risen to feed and famish us from exile underground. For you, chip of the incommensurate closed world, angel, a very concrete way in which his work has, he affected me, is in the attempt to write that poem I read you called Coin, A Coin for Joe. I literally spent over 2 years writing that poem. And I don't mean like working on it for an hour every 2 weeks or 2 months. I mean for long stretches, working every day on it for hours. My work before that poem, now it strikes me as being all very à haute voix, projected to the back seats of the auditorium, operatic in that way. And I don't think that's bad, but there's something about that is very much, the characters are very on stage. Ellen West, Nijinsky are very much, in a way, spoken à haute voix. And this is connected to the anger in those voices, the kind of rage that wants to break through some wall of indifference or silence. But I'd done that. What I'm describing, I think, describes my collected poems published in 1990. And soon after that, I met Joe, and I wanted to write a poem about this coin and how the coin was an intermediary between worlds, a lost world and our present world. And on the coin is this horse that is stretching its neck towards something it can never reach. And the Joe is like that coin that is an intermediary between worlds, that for me he had opened up something that had been inaccessible. And it had to be this small little poem, not à haute voix, but having a kind of intimacy and not exactly directness, but kind of meditative, finely worked texture that was modest. And I think I really learned to write in a new way over those 2 years when I was struggling to make that poem. And I think all my poems since then have been changed. I hope I still can do the haute voix, but it's as if my poems were all at a register up here, and I suddenly wanted and realized there was a register down here of intimacy that that had not been in my work, and that I wanted in my work, and that I feel this has in fact given me. I mean, I have written more poems, and it's given me like a whole new territory, a way of making a poem, a whole new territory of voice, of speech. And that really did come through trying to write that poem for Joe. I mean, it wasn't a question of imitating Joe's writing, but what Joe made me see as a way of being affected what I wanted the poem I made to be. And, that's incalculable. I could not ever get a version that satisfied me when he was alive. And I sent him 2 or 3 versions. He knew I was working on it. He liked the poem. I have letters in which he talks about reading the new version. But the version I read you was finished several months after his death. That poem, I went through a very long journey in writing. So it was very much conceived, and the body of it was written when he was alive, but I could not finally get all the parts there when he was alive. I have a poem called In Memory of Joe Brainard, which is an elegy, but I don't think of that poem as primarily elegy, though there is definitely an elegiac quality about it. No question. But as I say, I did not conceive it as an elegy. I did conceive it as a tribute. And if you say that someone is a kind of intermediary between worlds, that brings up the prospect that he's not always going to be in this world. This is written later. It's called Coat. You, who never lied about what you at every moment carried. The shameful, new, incomprehensible disease, which you, whose religion was candor, couldn't bear not to hide. Now that you have been dead 13 years, I again see you suddenly lay out my coat across your bed, caressing it as if touch could memorize it. No, you're flattening, then smoothing its edges, until under your hand, as I watch, it becomes hieratic, an icon. What I seized on as promise was valediction. I've always aspired to the kind of purity of voice, directness, candor that Joe had. I could never do it in the way that he did it. With Joe, it's he somehow is comfortable within the conventions of the faux naïf. I'm not. It would be very phony for me to take on that manner. He could with a kind of unselfconsciousness, and it corresponded to something that was very central to his spirit. Next to that, I feel all sort of involuted and dark and screwed up and unable to be as direct. It's a quality, as I say. I love George Herbert. I prefer George Herbert to John Donne. They're both great writers, and I'm not at all saying that Herbert is the greater writer, but I like Herbert more. I respond to this kind of tremendous, disarming purity of tone and candor that is tremendously intelligent. And, it's a quality that it's different, but it's also in Frank O'Hara. And I love Frank O'Hara's work. I never believed in the kind of dichotomies that dominated the literary world when I was in college. At that time there were sort of two camps. There was the Hall Pack Simpson anthology, and there was the Donald Allen anthology. And the Donald Allen anthology had Ginsberg and Frank O'Hara, and the Hall Pack Simpson had Robert Lowell and Elizabeth Bishop. Well, the idea that these are opposing spirits or camps is ridiculous. I never bought that. I love the work of Lowell. I got to know Lowell very, very well. I loved him. I loved Bishop, both as people and as writers. And I see no disparity whatsoever in loving and valuing them and their work, and in loving and valuing O'Hara or Joe Brainard or Ashbery. Though Ashbery is very different, and I think the kind of candor and directness is much more simply one of many possible notes in Ashbery. Ashbery is a very different artist, and well, of course, O'Hara and Brainard are different, but they share this quality I've been talking about much more strongly. And I so love O'Hara. I was very charmed and thrilled to discover that Joe had been O'Hara's lover for a while, and Joe adored O'Hara. There's a wonderful essay by Joe about Frank O'Hara, written after O'Hara's death. So this is much more a question of something I've aspired to.